Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this talk. I am Enrico Ghiorzi, and I would like to tell you about the work Patricia, Johann, and I did on deep induction. Induction principles are an essential tool to reason about inductive types. The standard induction principle, which we call structural induction, is though insufficient to treat complex types such as nested types and GADTs. So we turn our attention to the so-called deep induction principle, which extends structural induction. Deep induction rules for algebraic data types and nested types are well known, and we extend the deep induction principle to generalized algebraic data types. This talk will consist in a series of examples demonstrating the principle of deep induction applied to data types of increasing complexity, up to generalized algebraic data types. We start with algebraic data types, of which lists are the quintessential example. From the declaration of a list, we see that a list is defined inductively as either the empty list or the juxtaposition of an element and a list. Thus, the standard induction rule states that given a non-standard predicate P, if P is satisfied by the empty list and satisfiability of P is preserved when adding an element to a list by juxtaposition, then every list satisfies P. This is just a statement of an induction principle. But for lists to support such principle, we need to provide an inhabitant of the above type. This is just a straightforward exercise in the term calculus, but notice that the structural induction for lists fundamentally corresponds to a proof by induction on natural numbers over the length of the list. That is, it does not involve the data elements contained inside the list. The deep induction rule for the list of A type, instead, involves a predicate Q on the type A. The inductive hypothesis is that if an element of A satisfies Q and a list of A's satisfies P, then their juxtaposition satisfies P. The conclusion is that if a list satisfies the lifting of Q, then it also satisfies P, where the lifting of Q on list A is the predicate that tests every element of a list with Q. The principle of deep induction has been extended to nested types by Johann and Polonsky. A data type is said to be nested when its constructors involve instances of the data type other than the one being defined. Beware, though, that this is not allowed to happen in the constructor's return type. Otherwise, we would be talking about generalized algebraic data types, which are more general than nested types. For example, consider the type of perfect trees, where leaves are given by data elements and nodes are given by perfect trees of pairs. In practice, a perfect tree is a list of data elements of length a power of 2. Notice that the P-node constructor presents nestedness in the occurrence of a P3 of A times A. Because of nestedness, induction rules have to involve a polymorphic predicate P. Structural induction hypotheses are that every leaf satisfies P, and if a perfect tree on A times A satisfies P, then the node tree satisfies P as well. The conclusion is that P is satisfied by every perfect tree, regardless of the data they contain. As for lists, the deep induction rule also involves a predicate on the type of the contained data in the form of a polymorphic predicate P. The deep induction rule also involves the lifting of the pair type, which essentially takes two predicates and produces their pointwise product predicate. the deep induction hypothesis is that for every predicate Q on A, if a data element A satisfies Q, then the leaf containing A satisfies the predicate PQ on P3 of A. And if a perfect tree on A times A satisfies P of Q times Q, then its node 3 satisfies PQ. The conclusion is that for every predicate Q, if a perfect tree satisfies the lifting of Q to P3, then it also satisfies the predicate PQ. Again, for a perfect tree to satisfy the lifting of Q, it means that all of the data elements it contains satisfy Q. A nested type is truly nested if the nesting is over the type itself. Consider, for example, the type of bushes, whose constructor beacons exhibit an occurrence of bush of A. Since structural induction ignores the data contained into the data type, it makes little sense to apply it to a type which contains itself. So deep induction becomes an essential tool to compute with nested types, as structural induction is insufficient for the task. Luckily, deep induction keeps working as for the previous examples. Notice though that in the induction hypothesis associated to the constructor beacons, the one presenting true nesting, the polymorphic predicate P is applied to itself. More precisely, P is applied to the predicate PQ on bush A to produce a predicate on bush of bush A. We finally turn our attention to generalized algebraic data types. These, as hinted before, are inductive types that allow for instances other than the one being defined to appear in their constructors even in the return type. The simplest GADT is actually very remarkable. It's the equality type. Indeed, while we define the equal type over two type parameters, the return type of its raffle constructor is the equal type applied to two copies of the same type parameter. Effectively, the return type of raffle is given by equal composed with a diagonal functor. Furthermore, notice that the lifting of equal predicates the extensional equality of the two given input predicates. So given a polymorphic predicate P, the induction hypothesis of the deep induction rule for equal requires that if two predicates are extensionally equal with respect to reflexivity, then they satisfy P with respect to reflexivity. The conclusion then states that if two predicates are extensionally equal with respect to any proof of equality, then they satisfy P with respect to the same proof of equality. The equal type is so important because we can use it to treat all other GADTs via the so-called Henry Ford encoding. Indeed, given any GADT, we can re-encode it by using the equal type to remove nested instances from the return types of the constructors, so that the GADT will appear as a nested type. Of course, a GADT can only be made to appear as a nested type, as the constructors will involve the proper GADT equal. So the type will not be a nested type, but it will be a proper GADT. Still, this encoding, together with the previous examples with nested types, will guide us to derive the deep induction rule for GADTs. We consider as an example the type of sequences. Notice that the constructor pair can only produce sequences of pairs. Through the equal type and the Henry Ford encoding, we can rewrite the pair constructor to produce a sequence of an arbitrary type A provided that a proof of equality of the type A with a product type is presented. Then the induction hypothesis associated to the pair constructor states that given a proof of equality for a predicate QA and the product of the predicates QB and QC, if a sequence SB satisfies the predicate PQB and a sequence SC satisfies the predicate PQC, then the pairing of the sequences SB and SC satisfies the predicate PQA. Other than the use of the lifting of equal, the deep induction rule for GADTs is thus analogous to the one for nested types. We can then generalize the previous examples to the case of an arbitrary GADT, although we require that all types involved in the definition, in the type definition, be functorial, in the sense that they admit a functorial map function. Indeed, in order to show the deep induction rule is inhabited by constructing a term for it, we need the maps and maps of predicate liftings for all these types. This is not an overly restrictive condition, since we know that all inductive types up to nested types admit functorial semantics. The most substantial restriction we have is that G cannot be truly nested. That is, there can appear no G of something in the type definition. Indeed, in case of a truly nested GADT, such as the one in the example, we can still express the deep induction rule. Notice that this example provided is a toy example in that the type is actually non-inhabited, but it still shows what is going on and the reason why deep induction doesn't work for this. It's just easy to give an example of an inhabited type that presents the same pathology. As explained before, though, it's not possible to replicate the same argument used before to construct an inhabitant for the rules type. Indeed, we would need to make essential use of the map of the predicate lifting of G. A functorial and parametric model for GADTs is not currently known, and the obvious approach to construct one fails, as detailed in the work of Johann, Jeffries, and mine. Luckily, truly nested GADTs are not common in practice, so much that we are not aware of a single instance of them in the literature. So the proposed extension of deep induction to a large subclass of GADTs can be useful in practice. Furthermore, all these examples have been formally implemented in AGDA to verify their correctness. And thank you for listening.
Okay, so any question? Okay, so I do have a very technical, like extremely technical question. So I actually got very interested in this work, and so I look at your oh, light, please. Oh, okay. So let me pause my question, and then there's a remote question.
Hi, I'm sorry, Favoni. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to stay in line for a live question. I'm sorry for the confusion. Please go ahead with your question first. I'm sorry.
Oh, All right. So my question is that I've got interested in your ACTA code, and I noticed that some of them needs the terminating to convince ACTA that it's actually terminating, and I kind of trick the. I wonder if you have considered some of the optimization or some of the specialization that you could do, because I believe some of the combination can avoid the technical difficulties that you might have in your ACTA code.
Thank you for the question. So I believe you might be correct that there are some cases in which it's possible to modify the code in such a way that it does not require the terminating pragma, but that's, I believe, generally true for ADTs, because for a more general type, such as nested types, and we can think of the type of bushes, for example, there is no way to even define the type of bushes without the terminating pragma. So in general, we still need terminating. Also, there is a question if like the modification needed to remove the use of pragma truly give us the same types and the same definitions, and that can be a kind of subtle question. But I agree that in at least in spirit, it's possible to kind of help using terminating in some specific examples, although not all of them. And the ones that we are most interested in are the ones with more advanced data types, specifically GADTs and nested types. So I mean, we probably just didn't think too hard about how to remove the terminating pragma for ADTs. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Oh. So, Andre, do you have a question?
Yeah, can I ask my question? Hi.
Sure, go ahead, please.
All right. Hi, Enrico. So this is very interesting work. I'm actually following it with great interest because I worked on something similar in Isabel Hall for essentially what we call compositional proof methods there, and we have something like deep induction for a more restricted class of data types. So we can do rose trees, for example, and even perfect trees recently, but not bushes yet, and certainly not your class of GADTs that you discussed. But I would be interested to hear your opinion about the extension of your work, which, by the way, I hope it gets implemented in as many proof assistants as possible, because it's really interesting. So about the extension of your work to deal with core data types. So in Isabel, for example, we work with a binary version of the induction of deep induction for rose trees. Essentially, it's what you would call predicate lifting based deep induction, but with relation lifting, because we apply this to core data types as well. So I guess my question is, do you see your techniques working for core data types out of the box by switching to binary parametricity to binary relations?
Okay, thank you, Andre, for the question. So I think the essential ingredients we use like for our techniques are the techniques of unary parametricity and functoriality. And indeed, we need to be careful when we extend to GADTs because we have issues with functoriality, but we still manage to work them out. But let's say that we don't think about functoriality, so we focus on parametricity. I think the same technique should extend to relational parametricity.
But only as a prerequisite for extending this to co-inductive data types. That's
yeah.
the only.
Yes, that's a harder question. We honestly didn't think about that, so I cannot claim I know anything about this.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, that was just I was wondering if you are considering extending your work to co-data types.
No, that's not something that we have considered. It's certainly an interesting, we would be an interesting development, but we have totally not thought about that.
Yeah,
so
my
I think
gut
it's
feeling is that your techniques would work for co-data types in principle too. Yeah.
I'm mildly optimistic about that too, because the techniques we use are very categorical, at least in spirit, and so there is some hope that there is some duality going on, and that it can be kind of extended by use of duality and opposite categories, terminal algebras instead of initial algebras, and so on. But that's just a guess.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And I saw that there's a comment in the Q&A saying that for Bush types, I have an inductive an induction principle implemented in calc based on a modification of the Medler style induction. So this is by Ralph, the speaker of the. Okay. Do we have any questions? Oh, there's a follow-up. Oh, but it's not nice to work with. And also we have a real question. Can you comment on the connections with the work of I don't know, not sure how to pronounce their names, Kafaks and Kaposi?
So I'm not very familiar with their work, so I'm really afraid I'm really afraid I cannot. I wonder if Patricia might be familiar with their work, if she wants to say something, but I myself, I'm afraid I cannot really say anything about this.
Work either. I can't say anything. I don't know that work. I don't, hang on. I don't know that work either.
Okay,
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I can't say anything about the connection to that work either. So sorry.
Okay, so perhaps we can continue a discussion offline. So let's see whether there are any more questions. I don't see any more question coming. We still have a few time. Let me do a final round of questions. No questions. If not, let's give the speaker another round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much.